Hello! In this video I will show you how to get started with making mods for content warning. We use Pepinex as the mod loader in the content warning modding community, so we are writing Pepinex plugins. So, first we are quickly going to go through setting up the development environment, and then we will install Pepinex and some mods with R2Modman. We will use Silo's content warning mod templates as a base for our mod, as those are already configured well. We will, however, have to read the game's code to know what methods we are patching for the mod we are going to make in this video. So, let's start with the development environment. You'll want to install the .NET SDK and an IDE. Visual Studio is likely going to be the easiest option, but you can also go with Visual Studio Code or Rider. Rider isn't free and Visual Studio is available only on Windows, so I'm using Visual Studio Code. See the description for links to the .NET SDK and the IDEs. Next, we'll install R2Modman. And again, the install link is in the description. Once you have installed R2Modman, you'll want to choose Content Warning as the game, and creating a new modding profile for mod development is a good idea. A profile in R2Modman contains mods, and you can make as many profiles as you want. For the mod development profile, you'll want to install AutoHook which will generate some files we will make use of in our mod. You'll find out more about this later in the video. I also recommend installing Development Startup so you will jump into a game as soon as possible. It can save quite a bit of time. Now we are ready to make our mod using Silo's templates. The link is in the description, and so is the install command in this example. Since we are using Monomod in this tutorial, I would recommend using the Monomod template. If you are using Visual Studio or Rider, you can create your mod from templates with a UI. However, as I am using Visual Studio Code, I will be using the command line. And here is an example of using the templates with the command line. I have named my mod Lethal Shopping and set the GUID as harmony.lethalshopping. The GUID is a unique identifier for your mod. The plugins directory is where our mod's DLL file will get automatically copied to when we build our mod. The game directory is used for referencing assemblies from the game. While this is not needed because the project falls back to a NuGet package containing stripped game assemblies, this will allow us to see the actual decompiled code when, for example, we control-click a method in our IDE. The publicize game assemblies option will make it as if the private and the internal stuff were public, so we don't have to use a reflection to access those. This will make our lives a bit easier. So, once we make our mod, we will be greeted with this. We have a readme file that has some tips on working with what we have here and getting started with Monomod, or Harmony if you use the Harmony template. I recommend reading through this. Now we are at the point where we need to read the game code so we can get started with patching code and doing all that fun stuff. Notice that most IDEs have some decompilation functionality, so a dedicated decompiler isn't completely necessary. However, I do still recommend installing one. dnspy.ex seems to be the most popular decompiler and is a great choice. ILSpy is another one, and it has many related projects like extensions for IDEs and a command line tool for outputting the decompiled code into our drive, so we can use any editor for viewing it instead of just the decompiler. For example, I prefer using Visual Studio Code for browsing the code, so I use the command line tool. In this video, I will not be going through how to use decompilers, but instead I recommend reading the article on the Lethal Company modding wiki. Link in the description. Now onto patching code. For this, we can use Monomod or Harmony. Of these two, I prefer Monomod since its HookGen is awesome and makes patching methods effortless. HookGen generates events for nearly every method in a target assembly that we can subscribe to, and it allows us to autocomplete or patch methods. Visual Studio is good at this, but with Visual Studio Code, we will have to use Quick Fixes menu to generate the patch methods, which isn't too bad, but not quite as convenient. Also, another reason I prefer Monomod is that it works in predictable ways, unlike Harmony, which has its own rules you have to follow. Anyways, I recommend reading the articles on patching code on LethalWiki, as they go much more in depth on using Monomod than I do in this video. I wrote those articles, by the way. But we'll go through the basics of patching. So, what if we wanted to add this line of code at the end of the addItemToCart method from the game? Well, we just need to write on shoppingcart.addItemToCart. So, on class name, method name in this case, because the shopping cart is not defined under any namespace. Then we use the addition assignment operator and write our patch method's name after that. This part can be autocompleted in Visual Studio, but we must name the method ourselves in Visual Studio Code, after which we can choose from the Quick Fix menu to generate that method. The on namespace comes from an assembly generated by AutoHookGen which itself uses Monomod's HookGen to do that. Do notice that you must run the game at least once with AutoHookGen for this file to be generated. In our CSBrush file that came with the template for our mod, the mmhook file for assembly C# is referenced by default, which is why everything just works. You can also get mmhook files for other assemblies by changing a setting in AutoHookGen config. For this, see the mod page for AutoHookGen. So, here's the rest of this example patch. In the patch method, we have arguments from the event we subscribed to. These include the trampoline for the original method or another method in the detour chain if multiple mods have patched this same method. We also have the original arguments of the method we are patching, including the normally hidden instance of the object, which is called self here. Static methods will not have this argument. So, we can call the trampoline by feeding it all the arguments of the original method. Most of the time, you will want to call this original method, since not doing so will result in bad compatibility with other mods that are patching the same method. If you don't call the original method, then other mods patches might not run. If what you are trying to do requires changing the original method somewhere inside the method, you should use an IL hook instead. For those, see the Lethal Company modding wiki. Anyways, in this example, after we have called the original method, we increment the cart value of this instance of shopping cart by a random value between 0 and 100. So, we are finally ready to write our mod. I will be making a mod where if the player tries to buy or add an item to cart they can't afford, they will die. So, we'll first have to find a method that checks whether or not the player can afford to buy an item. For this, we can use dnspy or another decompiler. And you can do this by searching by words that relate to what we are trying to find. Then, we'll want to find a method that will kill the player. And finally, we'll write our patch. Since this is not a reading game code tutorial, here's the method I found that checks if the player can afford to buy an item. And here, in the player class, we have a method that will kill the player, and since it is not a static method, we will call it with the static player instance named localPlayer. So, we'll hook into the canAfford method of room.solder, like so. And then we write our patch method. Since batch methods in monomod act like the original methods, our method must also return a boolean value, and we can get the result of the original method by calling orig. Before we return, we can check if the result is false, meaning the player can't afford to buy the item, and then call the die method on the local player instance. And that's it. We could also test this better by making a simple patch to give us some starting money, which is fairly simple to do. Money is also defined in room stats holder, so we could patch some method and increment the money there. Anyways, we have reached the end of the video. For further information and help on modding content warning, you should join the Content Warning Modding Discord. Also, make sure to check out the Lethal Company modding wiki, as a lot of stuff there applies to modding Unity mono games in general with PepiNex. On the Lethal Company modding wiki, you'll also find information on publishing your mod on Thunderstor, which you might want to look into after you've made your mod. If you have any questions related to modding content warning, feel free to write them in the comments, though I do recommend looking into Lethal Company modding wiki first and joining the Content Warning modding Discord, as that way you'll get answers much faster. Anyways, thank you for watching and good luck with your modding journey. I'm out.